Hi, I'm Lisa Horton. I'm here today to tell you about wildflowers. This is another of the great series of Eye on Sun Valley wildflower videos. And I'm going to start today in an unlikely place, you might think, by talking about a flower that you have seen a million of this spring. But I bet you haven't really looked at them. You know, there's a difference between seeing and really looking. So I want to start out today's group of plants, which will mostly be out in the sagebrush, by talking about the common dandelion. Now that might surprise you, but the common dandelion is a very widespread plant. As you can see, I'm sitting here on the edge of a park in Haley, and I'm surrounded by these beautiful yellow flowers that the bees just love. Why do I want to talk about dandelions? Well, they've been of great importance to people, they're of great importance to bees, and they provide a really good model to look at some other members of the same family that we're going to look at a little bit later on today. So, the dandelion is a member of the Asteraceae, or sunflower family, aster family. Used to be called the composite family back in the ancient days when I was a student. What are the characteristics of that family? Well, we've talked about this before in other videos. We've talked about arrowleaf balsam root, and we've talked about yellow mule's ears. And the balsam root is just now starting to bloom. Mule's ears, I haven't seen any yet. But the characteristics of the family are something that you can count on when you look at these flowers. So this is not just a flower. This is a whole head of flowers. That's why we call it a composite flower. So these are all individual flowers with one petal each, all crowded together. And if we look at the back, we also see this leafy business here. These are called bracts. These are modified leaves. And they are behind the entire flower head. So if I were to rip this apart, you would see individual flowers. And if you think about it, when you take the dandelion seed head and you blow it, all those individual parachutes are the result of the fertilized ovary of every individual flower. And they actually also have, the city of Haley won't mind if I pull a few, milky juice, white milky juice, which is an important characteristic of a lot of the members of this family. The leaves are what we call pinnate, which means shaped like a feather, pinna, feather. And interestingly, all of these pointy lobes point backwards towards the center of the flower. But there is some variability in the leaves of the dandelions. This one, for example, has a little bit broader segments, but we look at them and we know that they are dandelions. So what is medicinal about this plant? Well, first let's talk about how it's been used as a food source. You can pick the young leaves and boil them as a pot herb, or you can eat them raw. And the young leaves are nice and tender with a little bit of a arugula taste. You can make jam out of the dandelion flower heads. And I have been told that in Poland, they used to make a honey substitute by making a syrup out of the dandelion heads. And of course, there's dandelion wine. But medicinal. Well, if you remember that the leaves are very high in iron, you can see that medicinally this would be a really good treatment for anemia. But also the dandelion leaves are a diuretic, which means if you're retaining water or have swelling, then this plant is really good for relieving that. So in Ireland there was a folk story, and if you try this and you're successful, you owe me some money. Take 3 dandelion leaves and extract the juice and put it on a wart. But you have to do it 3 days in a row, and then the wart will fall off. In the last segment, we talked about the common dandelion, and now we're out on Two Dog Trail out in the sagebrush, and I want to show you a native dandelion. This is called the false dandelion or mountain dandelion. My friend, Kristen Fletcher, also in the Native Plant Society, calls this the real dandelion, and the introduced one, the common dandelion, she calls that one the fake dandelion because, you know, this is the native species. So how are they similar, and how can looking at the common dandelion help you identify this dandelion? Well, the flower is very much the same. It is a composite flower head, and each of the flowers has a petal, but unlike in a sunflower, there are no flowers in the middle that are called disc flowers. Visualize the sunflower. This is not like that. This is very shaggy looking and more like a lion's mane, if you've ever seen whimsical illustrations about dandelions. Also, it has a leafless flower stem, just like the common dandelion, and it has a rosette of basal leaves. They're not as big or as fancy as the common dandelion, but they do have the same milky sap. And you will see this very commonly right now we're in the third week in May, out in the sagebrush in big clusters like this here. Just beautiful and so important to the pollinators. We're going to take a brief pause. We'll be right back.
When life calls for necessary add-ons, your home can pitch in to help with a new home equity line of credit from D.L. Evans Bank. This is living on a whole new level. This is community banking.
Better food, better price, better service. Atkinson's Market, supporting local farmers since 1956.
The next plant we're going to talk about is another member of the aster or sunflower family, but it's a bit different. It's something that's very common this time of year in mid to late May, and really an easy one for you to identify if you just pay attention to a few important things. So this is Ballhead Ragwart, also called Groundsel, Senecio sphaerocephalus. Now this is a little bit different, although it's in the same family, it's a bit different from the dandelions, the two of them that we just talked about. So first I'm going to show you something bigger. I'm going to show you an arrowleaf balsam root. I know you know these when you see them on the hillsides, but I just want to remind you that this is an entire head, a collection of flowers of two types. In the middle are the disc flowers, and on the outside are the ray flowers that each have one petal. And the reason I say this to you is because that's the type of flower of this groundsel or Ballhead Ragwart. So the official name of this plant, Senecio sphaerocephalus, for this Ballhead Ragwart, Ballhead Groundsel, as you like. Senecio refers to old man, so hairy stems, a little grizzly looking, and the ballhead part is the sphaerocephalus. So sphero means sphere, cephalus, cephalic, skull. So we have this flower form that's kind of a dome. So how will you identify this plant in the field? Very common this time of year in third week in May, and will be for a while. You have these bright yellow flowers that have kind of scraggly petals, and you have this ball head inflorescence and these basal, mostly basal oval leaves. But the key thing is, if you look at the back of this composite flower head and you look at the bracts that surround the back of the flower, each one has a black tip, and that's how you know this one for sure. There's one more plant in the sunflower or aster family I'd like to talk about, and it might surprise you that I would choose this one since it's not blooming yet. But I'd just like to point out that you can identify wildflowers by other things than the blossom. There are seed pods that you can learn to recognize. There are leaves that you can learn to recognize when they first come up in the spring. And this is one of those. This is the hawkweed, hieracium albertinum. And it is extraordinarily hairy. And if it were blooming, every part of the plant except for the petals would be really hairy. It has little yellow composite flowers, very much like the mountain dandelion, but smaller. But you can identify this from the leaves. And just look at these water drops from yesterday's rain. This is so hairy that these drops aren't even sliding off this leaf. I just love this. So they look to me like a pile of rabbit's ears, and you can always identify the hawksweed by its leaves. Today we've mostly talked about yellow members of the aster or sunflower family. So for a little ending treat for you, we're going to talk about the larkspur, which also is blooming out here in the sagebrush right now. And although each one is a rather small plant, there are enough of them that you can get all the purple that you can get your eyes full of. So the larkspur, the one that grows out in the sagebrush, is kind of short like this, as I said, and we have another larkspur in our valley that grows about 3 feet tall. If you've been out Greenhorn Gulch along the trail there in the moist areas, that's where you'll see the taller one. I'm not going to try to get to species here because species are very difficult with larkspur, but as long as you know you've got larkspur, then you know you're good. Larkspur. Why is it called larkspur? Well, let's talk about the form of the flower. This is a member of the Ranunculaceae or buttercup family, and when we did the video for Eye on Sun Valley of the early spring bloomers down at Sheepbridge, I talked kind of extensively about the buttercup family, and I did mention that a number of the members of that family have rather odd-shaped flowers. Think about the columbine, think about the monkshood, and the larkspur. So what you have here is a flower that is bilaterally symmetrical. So if you think about a face, that means there's an ear here, there's an ear over here. There's a top of a head here, but there's a chin down here. So it's only symmetrical in one direction. And you look at this and you're probably saying, look at those big, beautiful purple petals. But no, those are not petals. These are sepals. And these petals are these little guys in the middle. So some of these have kind of a white coloration, which you can see better in a close-up, and they have blue markings on them, which are nectar guides to tell the pollinators, eat here, eat here. And on the back of the flower, I'm going to just pick one so that you can see what I mean. This top sepal is modified into a spur, and that's where the nectar is. So the little insect comes in, sees the nectar guides, heads in there, crawls back in there, and in the process it fertilizes the flower. So this little spur-shaped thing, this little horn-shaped thing, was seen by some fanciful person who originally named this plant as being like a lark's spur, the spur on the back of the lark's foot.